Welcome to the Prosperous Empath Podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the HSP Awakening Virtual Summit. My name is Josh, and today I've got Catherine Wood with me as my guest. Catherine will be leading this session, and Catherine's talking about the power of rest and resistance for HSPs. So, Catherine, welcome to the summit.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Catherine, I'd love it if you don't mind to start out with, could you tell us a little bit about your HSP origin story? So maybe share a little bit about when and how you found out you were a highly sensitive person and how that discovery has impacted your life and relationships.
Mm-hmm. So my journey was a bit of an indirect route. And I don't think I've ever shared this story. So that's a fun question to start with. Yeah. So in 2017, I was a coach trainer and training coaches in Washington, D.C. and in San Diego. I did that for about 4 years. And I was in San Diego training coaches, and my co-facilitator passed me a note that said, "Read Quiet" by Susan Cain. And I was like, why? And I think he sent me a follow-up post-it that said, "Are you an introvert?" And I was like, have you met me? Because no one would ever guess I'm an introvert. I have such a big personality. I take up a lot of space. I talk loudly. I laugh even louder. Like, I have a big presence. And I read that quiz. I was in an airport going on vacation with my now husband, and I took this 30-question quiz. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I was like such an epiphany for me. And it felt like a challenge of knowing myself, because I was like, how could this be at such odds with who I thought myself to be? And it was really it opened this can of worms around who I am. And embracing that I was an introvert was the first step. And then as I'm sure so many of our speakers on the summit talk about, I read Dr. Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person. That was kind of a check along the way. But to be honest, of the three kind of personality traits that I most identify with, which are introvert, highly sensitive person, and empath. Empath is the one that I connect with the most on just a real soulful level. And what's fascinating about being an empath is when I first trained as a coach back in 2014, we did this exercise where we distinguished each of our top 5 strengths. Mm-hmm. And one of my top 5 strengths was empath. And I never claimed that for myself. I never saw the power in it. I never really kind of connected with its, the presence of it in my life until probably 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I think that that's really normal. I think that we have these intrinsic gifts that we've learned to disconnect from or to minimize in our lives. And that has been a huge part of my own experience with all those qualities.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that story and that part of your journey. It's amazing that's been part of your journey. And I love that how that unfolded. And I think just so often we underestimate, I think, just the courage that it takes to go on that journey of self-discovery. So I appreciate that you were willing to ask those questions, because you could have ignored the post-its. You could have just moved on. Oh, there's nothing for me there. But I think so often our hearts will prompt us that, no, there is something. Let's look at this. Let's explore this. And I love that your journey started with Quiet, because that is an amazing book. I absolutely love that one.
Mm-hmm.
And it does open up so many different doors.
And I just feel a need to add that I think it is such an internal process to be able to own these traits
Mm-hmm.
and to really connect with them as gifts and as individual strengths. So I appreciate the summit for that reason, because, even for me, like a decade being in this work, highly trained, I still notice telling my husband from time to time, oh, don't be so sensitive. And I'm like, at this point, I'm so grateful for having that self-awareness to catch myself and perhaps prevent myself from saying it. But I think we are culturally conditioned to be a certain way, right? Like even in our American education systems, right? We were all educated to be extroverted. Mm-hmm. So me being in an introverted, sensitive, highly empathic body, like I, from a very young age, really learned that I needed to be someone different. And so coming home to yourself, having these opportunities to hear from leaders who've really done that internal work to celebrate these qualities as gifts is a huge part of our journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you express that. That's awesome. So I guess from there, if you don't mind, I know you, as the founder and head coach at Unbounded Potential, you guys are doing some amazing work. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do, who you help, and how you help them over there?
Absolutely. So I have a team of 6 coaches who I partner with. We coach empathic entrepreneurs and conscious leaders to become more effective leaders, to scale and grow their businesses while keeping the burnout and sabotaging their joy, keeping that really just that polarity at bay, and growing and scaling in a sustainable, conscious way. And we do that through one-on-one coaching, and I run 2 masterminds. And truly, I find myself being more and more called to group work, because I think specifically for the sensitive, empathic community, having peers who are walking the talk and inspiring each other, like it just provides another layer and level for being called forth, for being held accountable, for being held up in the face of our fears. So I think in particular for those of us who identify as sensitive, empathic, that we can really thrive in a values-aligned community.
That's awesome. And that's actually, I love that you touched on that. That's one of the other themes that has come up in each of the interviews that I've done and in many of the sessions, is first that theme of coming home to ourselves, but then also the idea of community and finding a community of people who can support and encourage us, and who we can share both our struggles and also our celebrations with. And so I love that you've created masterminds that allow people to do that, especially people who are sensitive, who are introverted. It's a safe place for them to come and share their big ideas, and ask for feedback and ask for guidance, and also find kindred spirits to journey with. So that's amazing.
And you know what? Just to add to that, because hits home for me so much. Like, we're often underestimated in the business world, right? Like sensitive empaths are often underestimated because we listen first. We might speak more slowly, more intentionally, more quietly. We might respond versus jump into the game. So we're often underestimated. And so being surrounded by people who think so conscientiously and intentionally like we do, it's a game changer. Yeah. Being underestimated my entire business journey has been such a part of my personal experience, and something that I've had to overcome at each step of the way. And so I think that's a game changer for sensitives and empaths.
That's awesome. You're absolutely right. And I think what I've noticed is that when I first started hearing about what it meant to be a highly sensitive person, you hear all of the, for lack of a better term, namby-pamby explanations, and it's this idea of, highly sensitive people are fragile, they're weak, they're frail. They, at the end of the day, just need to go home and take a bubble bath and unplug from the world. And not that there's anything wrong with a bubble bath, but it's just one of those things where, as I've learned more about the trait and learned what it means to be highly sensitive, I think, no, we're badasses. Like there are so many gifts and there's so much potential that comes with this trait, and that comes with the wiring, even as introverts, like you said, when we do that deep inner work, when we take the time to formulate our thoughts more carefully, oftentimes others are shouting over us, but if they'll listen, there's wisdom and insight and connections that our minds have made that can bring value to everyone in the group. And oftentimes we can see the win-win solution that others don't see. We can see how, we can mediate in a way that is fascinating and is at times almost impossible to explain, because I think we pick up not just on the conversation that's happening out loud, but the nonverbal conversation, and oftentimes the energetic conversation under everything. And so we bring all of those elements if people will listen. And then, like you're saying, so often the other part of it is helping people to rediscover that innate courage that we had in our youth, and learn how to draw on that to raise their voice and to make sure that they're heard, and make sure they find a way to speak out and speak up. And whether that's in a meeting or whether that's about a cause that's near and dear to our heart, we all have that potential. And so I love that you're creating communities that help people do that, but also just that you've brought that into this conversation, because I think it's so powerful and so incredible to see people really step into that and become the forces of nature that they were born to be.
Totally. And honestly, this hits upon something we were talking about before we hit record, which is the idea of just our own individual journeys with connecting with our intuition, because as sensitive empaths, we are highly intuitive. So we need to create the space, the permission, the ability to come home to ourselves, to our bodies, to our hearts and souls, so that we can connect with that intuitive knowing, because so much of our business journeys is intuitive. We do not need some system to follow, some more hype marketing plan to implement. We just need permission and support to hone our intuitive knowing, and then the support to hold us accountable to what we already know there is to do for us. It's why we're highly creative. It's why we're naturally intuitive. It's why we thrive in community, because there's those multiple layers of accountability and calling each other forward and in.
I love that. That's amazing. Thank you so much for adding that and leaning in there into the intuition side of things, because you're absolutely right. And I love that we've brought that in. So diving into your topic for today, the power of rest and resistance for HSPs, I'd love to know, just first of all, why this topic?
So I really need to kind of credit the inspiration for the topic, which is a book that I highly recommend for our audience to listen to. It's called Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto by Tricia Hershey. And that was truly it's been such a part of my journey. It's a book that I recommend to so many clients. And it's just this idea that we need to prioritize rest. Now, more than ever, in the wake of the pandemic, we are still experiencing this world trauma that we don't have research, we don't have statistics to back, but that does not take away from the reality that we are still in the experience of this collective exhaustion, and we don't have words for it. And we certainly don't have kind of the historical precedent to normalize it, but we're living it. And as highly conscientious and conscious and intuitive creators, we need to create permission in our bodies to rest, to disentangle from our internalized capitalism, to ground, to grieve, so that we can reconnect with our purpose, our inspiration, and our missions and our contributions. We are highly purpose-driven and mission-oriented creators and entrepreneurs. And if we're not giving ourselves permission to ground, to come home to ourselves, to activate our parasympathetic nervous systems, to let go of what we've both individually and collectively been experiencing for the past 4 years now, we will never tap into our full potential.
Wow. I love how you've explained that and explored that. And I think you're absolutely right. I've been reading some articles recently about people who, may have gotten COVID at the beginning of the pandemic, who are still struggling with brain fog and exhaustion even now. And I think you're right. There is both, there's research being done and people are still figuring out why that's going on. But the element that you mentioned, especially the trauma of that, I mean, I think almost all of us, if not all of us on this call, can think of somebody that we lost in that time period, or many people that we lost, or people who were connected through our friends and family. And just that shared trauma, you're right. There's so much to explore there, and so much that for many of us hasn't been healed because it was one of those things where we were isolated in that time and not necessarily able to process that out loud with others. But then when the world started back up again, it ramped up and it hasn't slowed down. And most of us haven't been able to figure out how to slow down. We've been in this rush ever since then. So I love this topic. I love where we're going, and love how you've led into that, because you're right. There's so much in each of us that needs healing, that needs hope, that needs restoration, needs rejuvenation. And so many of us that are walking around still with the broken hearts that we encountered or that we acquired during the pandemic, that still are hurting, but we've just not had time to really process and think through those losses. And again, losses on every level, as a society, as a culture, individually, with family and friends. And so, but I can see now and hear in the direction we're going, how important rest is in light of all that.
It is primordial. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Like, it's essential. And, we're talking about the pandemic, right? But that's just the last 4 years. But there is so much we need to disentangle ourselves from and be able to let go of, like this grind culture and this hustle mentality that so many of us have grown our businesses amidst. Like, it's generational, it's ancestral, it's racial, it's the foundings of our American dream, it's the founding of how our country here in the US was birthed, and it was on the heels of racism. It was on the heels of some benefiting at the expense of others, and we are living with all of that in our bodies. And this topic, it just feels so deeply connected with my own journey and with what I've experienced, because I've lived in DC for the whole past decade, and I have been a coach there, and I cannot tell you how many exact same conversations I've had with high-powered, highly ambitious, driven, successful leaders, politicians, attorneys, just these high-powered figures in our nation who are succeeding professionally at the expense of their lives, right? They're just kind of unconsciously moving forward and plowing forward. And, I read a study recently put out by the UN that today more people die from workaholism than alcoholism.
Wow.
I mean, think about that. Like, there are some addictions in our everyday lives that are simply more socially acceptable than others. Workaholism, socially accepted in many cultures, in many circles, it's lauded.
Yeah.
But it is highly unconscious. And it is kind of continuing these systemic problems that the next generation will have to deal with if we don't learn how to rest and disentangle ourselves from this need, truly this need to connect our self-worth with our productivity, to define who we are and our self-value and our self-identity on what we accomplish and what we achieve and the acronyms that we place after our names.
Wow, there's so much depth there to that. I love that, especially the workaholism element that you pointed out, and how socially acceptable that is, and this idea that, when you ask somebody, how are you, and they say, I'm busy, it's like, oh, that's great. And from what you're saying, that's not great. And especially so often the way that impacts our health, but also the health of our relationships, and especially with our significant others and with our families. And going back to a little bit of what we were discussing again before we hit record, that idea that as families, we can be sitting together at the dinner table and everybody on their own device. So we're close together, but we're so disconnected. And that can happen as friends getting together and hanging out, like you mentioned as well. That idea that we could be with people we truly care about and have the intention of connecting and journeying through life together. And yet, even though we are sitting at the same table, be so far apart in terms of where our attention is and where our focus is. So I guess one thing I'd love, if you don't mind kind of delving into it, what are a few of the steps we can take to start to come back to an awareness of these traps that we've fallen into, and what can we do to maybe change that momentum that's leading us deeper into workaholism in the name of ambition?
Mm-hmm. So there's 4 practices I want to leave everyone with. And then there are some resources, because I am such a book nerd that I really, I would be remiss if I didn't share some of my favorite books on this topic. But before we get there, so the 4 places that I think we all need to begin with are, we need to contend with our origin stories. We need to accept that this is a systemic problem that we're all experiencing. This is not a me problem. This is not a you problem. This is not an individual problem. This is the consequence of the origin story of our country here in the US, but also at large on a world scale, right? So, and I think that is just so important to start with, because we can't change what we are unwilling to accept.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we can't accept what we're unwilling to acknowledge. And it is so much easier to acknowledge something when we see how we all do the same thing. Yeah. How my workaholism is in my body because I grew up in a bed and breakfast where my parents always worked, where we were always on, where we were always required to have a friendly face and be of service and prioritize other people over ourselves and come downstairs dressed. That lives in my body, that tendency to always work, right? My grandparents grew up in the Depression. So it's really multi-generational and so many more generations. And, coming back to rest is resistance, like Tricia Hershey talks about the importance that while we all need to rest, our Black-bodied brothers and sisters and beings, like, they need to rest even more. The need for our people of color in this country who were oppressed to such extreme levels in our country's origin story, we need to disentangle from that. And all of our issues are in our tissues, right? So our stories, it's ancestral, it's multi-generational, it's something we celebrate. Our country's origin story is so wrought with highs and lows and oppression and freedoms and stories that we're still rewriting. Mm-hmm. So I think it starts there. The second place I would invite us all to look is just where the opportunity lies to embrace ritual in our life.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Belonging, Overcome Your Inner Critic and Reclaim Your Joy. And what stuck out for me most about the feedback I received from the book was the chapter on ritual was time and time again, the message that resonated the most across the board with almost all my readers, it was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, how can I embrace more ritual in our lives? Because when we learn how to ritualize our life, and we gain more access to be present in the moment. We gain more permission to be here now, to prioritize ourselves. And when we pour from a full cup, we're just so much more grounded and centered to be of service and to contribute and to be creatively self-expressed and live out our life's purpose. So I talk about this a lot, but my morning routine is it is the kind of the heart and the soul of my day. And I could talk about this for hours, Josh, but I think that really, like, what's the one practice that if you were to start there would make the biggest difference in your experience of your day? And just allow that to be enough for now. And as you gain muscle memory, as you reprogram your subconscious to give yourself more permission to take that time for yourself, whether it's in the morning or in the evening, then you can habit stack, right? Then you might replace that habit, or you might add another one before it or after you've already created that muscle memory for consistency and just ritualizing.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there, but I could go on. The third one is normalizing leisure, really looking at how can you normalize the experience of taking time for yourself, of prioritizing pleasure, of empowering leisure as a daily habit, as a daily practice. In one of the books I'm going to recommend, and I'll just share it now, it's called Do Nothing. It's by the author is Celeste Headley. It's Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. She talks about this statistic that some of our nation's historians, that they were historically and largely known for how few hours they worked a day. Einstein, 4 hours a day he worked. His naps were non-negotiable. And I think that there's room for us to come back to some of those roots, to really look at how we can live in alignment with the seasons, how we can take more time for leisure, how we can reinvent our relationships to naps and siestas and extended breaks. And the fourth one that is really just kind of where we began this conversation is find like-minded conscious creators. It can be hard to pave a new path when you are the only one growing your business differently. But if you have a commitment to rest, to disentangle from hustle culture and grind mentality, if you have a commitment to prioritize ritual and leisure, find other people who are committed to those same values. It will make your path so much easier.
That's amazing. There's so much value there in those 4 points and in the examples you gave. And it is just, it feels like a wake up call for so many of us who have been stuck in that hustle and grind mentality. And it's interesting, you touched on, especially for each of us, just, early in life, the influences that we have. And so often in those first 7 years where we literally are being programmed by the environment around us, not to, even go into the origin stories behind that and, that are built into how we're wired. But even just in those initial years, so many of us see our parents working nonstop and hustling and building their dreams oftentimes, but at the expense of relationships, at the expense of their health even. And it's so easy to assume that that's normal because that's the model we were given. And like you said, also along the way, when we get into school and when we're growing up, that same thing is encouraged, work as hard as you can, become a great employee, become the best you can be, which means staying busy all the time and, always going after these bigger and better dreams and the next model up. And so many of those odd things that when we slow down and really think about, does this enrich my life, or is this just the vision that I was handed by somebody else, or the list of expectations I was given by somebody else? I think if we're really honest, many of us would say, yeah, I'm not living my dream. I'm living the dream that somebody else gave me and somebody else set up for me. And so even just taking the time to question that and come home to ourselves and really ask ourselves, what do I really want from life? I think that's the beauty of those 4 exercises and those 4 points that you made, is that in each of those, if we slow down and take the time to contemplate those, and I hope everybody will go back and re-listen to that part again, but I think that there is a message there crying out to us to take better care of ourselves and to really be present with the people that we love, and to really look at how we were programmed in those early years and what that has yielded. And maybe for some people, they had amazing examples and role models growing up, and they're living the life that they always wanted. But I think for many of us, it's like, no, I'm not. I've been going after what I thought I wanted or what I was told I should want, but it's not really what I want. And so I just appreciate everything you've shared so far, but especially that wake up call of let's pause, let's stop. And like you said, let's look at, okay, is there even any point in my day when I'm doing something for myself that I'm demonstrating healthy self-interest and taking care of myself? Or is every single day of my life about the hustle, about the grind, or about other people? And am I neglecting my own health in order to take care of others? And I loved the way you expressed it, was the idea of, the beauty of giving from a full cup, but so many of us are giving out of a cup we barely fill up enough to give to others, and then we collapse again and we're exhausted. So
absolutely. And when we're giving from an empty cup, we're in fight or flight, right? We are in our activated nervous systems. We're really just surviving. And so how can we give how can we give the best of ourselves? How can we tap into our potential? How can we step outside of our comfort zones when we're just operating unconsciously? So we need to activate our parasympathetic nervous systems. We need to get on the yoga mat. We need to meditate. We need to create space and permission to rest and to take space so that we can show up from a grounded, embodied, centered place and do what we're meant to do here, right? To truly live out our full expression, to come home to ourselves, to become.
Yeah, I love it. If you don't mind, I know this is not necessarily part of the planned conversation, but I'd love it if you would explore for just a moment what that could look like. If we look at the system the way it's designed now, the hustle and grind, the constant burnout and the normalization of burnout, the idea that companies treat their employees like they are disposable resources. If this one collapses from compassion fatigue, we'll just plug in somebody else. So, but if we start to follow these tips and this advice that you've given us and these insights that you're sharing and these resources that you've shared, if you were to dream out loud for just a few minutes here or just a few moments, what do you think the world could look like if we start to integrate these practices that you've shared, and especially those that you share with your clients or in those communities that you lead? Can you just paint a picture maybe for us of what you see that looking like and where we could go on the bright side of things?
Mm-hmm. I think we would wake up. I think that we would realize that we always have choice, that we always have agency, that we always have the ability to make a conscious choice. So many of us are living unconsciously. We're putting boots to pavement. We're doing what we were taught to do. We're living our lives the way that was modeled for us. And they may not be in alignment with our own values. It may not be an expression of who we really are. So I think creating permission and space to rest is oftentimes a shortcut. And that's why I start there, because if we can learn how to rest in our own bodies, we can connect more with ourselves. We can connect more with our own thoughts. We can become more self-aware. And as we become more self-aware, we can make different choices. But we can't choose differently what we're not aware that we believe or what we're not aware that we're doing. I think in my work, a decade of being in this work, I think one of the breakthroughs that I am most proud of with my clients time and time again is when they shift from, and to put it bluntly, when they shift from victim mentality to being at choice. When we realize that we are being at the effect of our environment, our work environment, our parents, our spouses, our home, money, our circumstances in life, cancer, right? Like it could be anything. When we realize that we are being at the effect of something, that we are being victimized by these conditions, these environments, these relationships, and we take that power back, we realize that in any single moment in time, we have the opportunity to make a different choice. We are reclaiming our consciousness and we're paving our path.
That is amazing. I love that. And I could just listen to you continue on all evening long about
I'm laughing
that.
at myself at how impassioned I am about it.
Yeah, no, it's amazing and it's beautiful. I love hearing that passion. I love hearing that vision, and I appreciate you sharing that just as part of this wake up call, as part of this conversation, because I think many of us need to hear that, and maybe we even need to hear it a few times for it to really sink in, for us to realize the logical conclusion of the programming we've received and where we'll continue if we don't start to take back control of our lives and take back the agency, like you talked about, and to decide that we're worthy and deserving of the good things that we desire in life, and that those things are available to us, but not necessarily if we continue on autopilot, not necessarily if we continue just following the script that we were handed, and we don't question those things, and we don't really tune into ourselves and ask, am I happy? Am I living the life that I desire? Or have I fallen prey to the dream that somebody else handed to me and told me I should want? So I love so much of what you've shared, and so many of those things, the exercises, the thoughts, and the points that you made. So is there anything else before we wrap up that you'd like to share?
Yes, there is some more there. I'm so glad you asked that question. Just to come full circle, I'm a workaholic, right? Like I identify as a recovering workaholic, and so much of my life was lived unconsciously. So much of my life I was at the effect of being a people pleaser and a perfectionist and trying to do things right and get it right and take care of other people. And I lived unconsciously, right? Like so many of those patterns, I was just victimized by these tendencies. And when I first started working with my own coach back in 2014, the first breakthrough that I had that made all the difference was prioritizing a morning routine. It was the single habit change that changed it all for me, because I, as a workaholic, like I just went from one task to the next, right? It took me over 2 years to build my business while I was working full-time as an economist for the government. Like I worked my 9 to 5 to come home to work my 5 to 9. I worked 7 days a week. I would take client calls before I went into the office, during my lunch break, and when I raced home, because I loved it. And that's what I had to do to create that safety. But it was at the expense of my rest. It was at the expense of taking care of myself. And when I reclaimed my schedule, when I made my morning routine non-negotiable, I realized just how much power I had over myself and how I managed my time and my energy and my choices. So that single change was the access point to it all. So it's really why I feel so passionate about this topic, but it's also what I want our listeners to take away from this talk, is that if you identify as an ambitious empath, if you are experiencing burnout, if you're exhausted from overgiving, Take back your time. Start with a morning routine, like really connect with the difference that would change your experience of your day. That if you were to commit to and make it absolutely non-negotiable, it would be the impetus for you to fall back in love with your schedule, with your routine, with yourself.
I love that. Thank you so much for adding that here at the end. That's beautiful thoughts for each of us to take with us. So for those who, like me, this message is resonating on a deep level, who want to learn more about the work you're doing, who'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you and your team, I know we'll have some links below the video in the notes, but just so they can hear you maybe explain a little bit, where is the best place for them to get started on that journey of connecting with you and your team?
I think you'll have the most intimate experience connecting with me by tuning into my podcast, The Prosperous Empath.
Yeah, I'd absolutely recommend that show. It's one that I tune into on a weekly basis, and definitely it's beautiful in so many ways. I always learn something. There's always something for me to take away and apply, but also I think it's one of those things where it does instill a sense of community just by listening and hearing the common shared experiences between you and the speakers on there, as well as those of us who are listening. And it is a great jumpstart to that sense of community that you're building through the work that you do. So that's great. And I know you're also active on LinkedIn, like many people who will be watching are as well. And I look forward to your posts, and there's always something new to explore there. And so, yeah, I just would recommend to everybody go and look Catherine up, find her podcast, find her on LinkedIn, connect with her, follow along with the work she and her team are doing. And don't be afraid to reach out and schedule a call or learn more about those communities, her masterminds. There's just, I feel like looking at it from where I'm at in my business journey and in my journey as an empath, I learn something from you every time I tune in, and every time I hear you share or speak through the podcast. And so I hope everybody else will follow along and will maybe look to you as somebody that we can look up to, who's maybe a little bit ahead of us as far as some of these things that you talked about today, and somebody who has really figured out how to structure their lives. Not to say that everything's perfect, not to say that there's not still room to grow.
Absolutely not.
You definitely have not painted yourself in that light at all. But just to say that there's a lot that you're getting right, and there's a lot that I admire about what you've discussed today, and a lot that's challenged me on a personal level. And I hope all of us will just continue to follow along with the work you're doing, and continue to challenge ourselves based on this conversation, and to say, okay, what is it I'd love to do in the mornings if I made time for myself? What would that look like if I hit the pause button and really tuned into how I want to start my day, and what would start my day off on the right note? I mean, even just that one question, I think, can lead to so many different discoveries, like you've talked about, and so much growth. So just to wrap everything up, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, your insight, and for being willing to join us here on the summit.
Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, I just I don't want to drag the conversation on too long, but everybody go learn more about Catherine and the work she's doing. Follow her podcast. Fall in love with her work just like I have, and you will not be disappointed to tune into everything that she is doing and sharing. And Joe, just to wrap things up, we appreciate you all sitting with us through this session and being here on the summit with us. And we I truly hope that each of you will hear that message of community that we've been sharing, that's been a resounding theme in this conversation, and get connected with one another, with the speakers, and with the beautiful community of highly sensitive people who are out there and who are longing for the same types of connections that you are. The key thing to remember is that we're only alone if we choose to be, and you have that choice to reach out and connect, and I hope you will. So thank you again all for your time and for being here with us, and we will see you in the next session. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.